Move over, Redfall, a new challenger has crawled out from the bowels of Mordor, and it might just take the throne for worst AAA of 2023. It's been a long time coming, but at last, the Lord of the Rings Gollum has arrived, emerging from the depths of development after a 2-year delay. My name is Codiak, this is Legacy Gaming, and today we're sharing our brutally honest review of the Lord of the Rings Gollum. First things first, we want to thank the team over at Daedalic Entertainment and Nacon for providing us an early access copy of the game. We had about 5 days to give this game a go, and having completed the game after about 14 hours, well, we certainly have some things to talk about. Set parallel to the events depicted in the Fellowship of the Ring, we find ourselves about 60 years after Bilbo's discovery of the Ring of Power. You assume the role of the enigmatic Gollum, unraveling the untold story of his perilous journey and how he outwits some of the most formidable characters in Middle-earth. We get to utilize his unique skills to explore and infiltrate legendary locations such as Barad-dûr and Mirkwood, scaling dizzying heights and sneaking past some stinky, no-good orcs. If you love games with epic combat and grand story reveals, well, this isn't the game for you. This is first and foremost a traversal puzzler where the focus is to get from point A to point B, usually without being detected or falling to your death. Based on everything we know about Gollum, it should be the perfect setting for our deceptive and tricksy friend, but alas, some things are too good to be true. Over the years, the world of Middle-earth has been explored and expanded well beyond imagination. With books, shows, and movies pushing the boundaries of what we know about the fabled world, we were excited and anxious to see what the Tolkien estate would allow the development team to do with Gollum given the mystery around his backstory. The game gets a few things right, and I think it's important we start there. For one, I thought Gollum himself was decent. In a post-Lord of the Rings universe, we've only really had one depiction of Gollum, which was established by Peter Jackson. I commend the team on creating a visually different yet familiar version of the iconic character. I was also worried that the lack of world-class voice acting by Andy Serkis would leave the character feeling hollow, but I have to say, the voice acting was well executed and you quickly become comfortable with the character as a whole. It's safe to say this is a different Gollum by many standards, but there is enough familiarity. And what's a true experience with this character like without the iconic dual personality banter between Gollum and Smeagol? In fact, at times you'll be directly involved in the decision-making process to determine an outcome. If you pick a kind and gentle approach to the situation, well, now you have to convince Gollum your way is right. If you want to take a darker and potentially deadly approach, well, Smeagol may not be on board. It's an interesting way to make personality an interactive component within the game. Now, I'll be honest, I don't fully understand how these choices vary the story, as I only played through the game one time. It's possible these decisions can lead to different outcomes, but that's just not something I was able to fully explore. As a lore nerd, I also appreciated the inclusion of enough iconic characters to keep me invested, even if it was only for brief moments. Getting to interact with characters from the books and movies was a real treat and something the team executed on well enough. Be it Gandalf the Grey, Shelob the Spider, or Thranduil, the Elf King of Mirkwood, there's a healthy amount of interaction with notable characters and plenty of references to memorable moments from the books and movies. As you progress through the game, the environments do get increasingly more difficult, offering different traversal mechanics, more complicated levels, and higher stakes. I was glad to see Middle-earth was given some time to shine. I thoroughly enjoyed some of the visuals the team established and found myself taking in the scenery on more than one occasion. I also appreciated the tools I was given to help solve some of the puzzles. You're equipped with a few simple rocks that you can use as distractions, and this pairs nicely with what I'll dub Gollum Vision. You should be familiar with this mechanic from other games. It allows you to see past the details of environments and focus solely on the enemies themselves, their movement patterns, and how to avoid them. Sadly, this is where the positives end, and we have to start getting brutally honest about the things that hold Lord of the Rings Gollum back. And as an avid fan of Middle-earth and the entire Lord of the Rings universe, we have a job to do here. So let's get to it. Simply put, there are quite a few issues with this game, and while it's easy to nitpick, there's plenty of big topics to discuss. For starters, let's talk about character models. I don't know what happened here, I really don't. I actually got to the latter chapters of the game and looked back on the first 4 or so chapters, and it's almost like it was developed after the fact or by a completely different, less experienced team. Except for Gollum himself, the quality of the character design falls way short of expectations and was often distracting, pulling me out of any intended immersion. The orcs especially seemed to have little to no shading, and the results were terrible. Considering we were playing on maxed out settings running 4K on a 3090 graphics card, there really is no excuse here. To add on to this, you have to consider the robotic movements of the models themselves, or the constant clipping in and out of walls and floors. One of my biggest complaints, however, is the enemy AI, and considering how important that is in a game where the fun factor is about sneaking around and avoiding detection, yeah, this is a huge issue. Oftentimes, objectives would break simply because an enemy wouldn't reset themselves after getting stuck in an animation. Times like these, I had to intentionally wander into the open to force a restart or wait out the issue in hopes that it would fix itself, which it rarely did. The initial objectives and quest dynamics were also simplistic and uninspiring, and it definitely didn't make for a great gameplay experience. Follow this orc, walk back to your cell, collect 5 ID tags. It just wasn't engaging content, quite the opposite. It felt like busy work. At the end of almost every objective, the next objective was go back to your cell, and literally you'd have to make the entire trek back. It was exhausting for all the wrong reasons. Mechanically, I think the goal here was to slowly introduce the players to various mechanics, but let me be clear, there's not a lot to unpack here. I think gamers writ large, even casual players, understand concepts like run, jump, climb, swing, and wall run, and that's all we're talking about here. It's not complicated, and it's not something we need almost 5 hours of game time to quote-unquote learn. It also doesn't help that objectives were short and often intertwined with unnecessary and awkwardly directed cutscenes. Now, for all of you collectors out there, you may be happy to know that yes, collectibles are a thing, but again, I'll be honest, I have no idea why or what purpose they serve. There's no real lore associated with them, and they don't unlock anything, they just exist to exist. Now, I didn't waste my time collecting all of them, so maybe they do unlock some super secret cutscene or something like that, but the fact that the game doesn't even hint at some sort of reward for your efforts instantly makes me believe the system is there simply to chew up your time. Now, what was probably the single most disappointing thing about the game was at the very core of Lord of the Rings Gollum, the puzzles. Lacking creative problem-solving opportunities, the paths and solutions are almost always linear, offering limited choices to the player in what they can and can't do. You'll find you have to avoid enemies in numerous situations, but there's really only one path through a problem. You don't have multiple options at your disposal, and while you can choke out certain enemies, that option is limited. It's early 2000s thinking in a supposed modern AAA title, and ultimately boils down to the dev's way or the highway. I actually ended up breaking the game a few times because I found an alternative way to an objective, only to find I couldn't actually activate it. Turns out this wasn't the quote-unquote right way to play the game. In those cases, I would have to start over and go through the specific trigger points the devs had designated in order to activate the objective cutscene. As a player, it's deflating, and as someone that's used to the flexibility and creative options often given to players nowadays, this felt like a huge step backwards. After Chapter 5, the traversal complexity definitely picks up, and there were larger and harder puzzles to solve, but the game still suffers from the one path to rule them all problem. Pivoting just a bit, let's end talking about narrative. Surely, this Tolkien tale has to have some high points. I'm sure the actual story does, but the implementation of said story seems to jump around quite a bit, often in disjointed interactions and unrelatable characters. It fails to create a strong narrative thread that captivates players and drives their curiosity. You're often introduced to a character at the beginning of a chapter, only to be given the option at the end to kill them or let them live. Either choice resulted in them no longer being in the story, so the decision felt pointless and the characters themselves quickly forgettable. While visually the game does have a few standout moments, overall, there were constant distractions that kept popping up that pulled me out of the world of Middle-earth that I love so much. Whether it was that elf that was just hovering above the ground or halfway clipped through a wall, or the rope asset that simply didn't render into the game, I just couldn't see past these constant issues that were regular interruptions to my experience. To put it bluntly, the Lord of the Rings Gollum offers a unique perspective on one of the most fascinating characters in Middle-earth lore. The traversal puzzles and mechanics I had hoped would add some serious depth to the experience were simply bogged down by constant and immersion-breaking technical and narrative flaws. Die-hard fans of Tolkien's work may find some small enjoyment here and there, but I can't imagine it'll meet their high expectations. The Lord of the Rings Gollum falls short by almost every measure and fails to be a memorable or fun game. Friends, I hope you enjoyed this brutally honest review for The Lord of the Rings Gollum. We love doing reviews here on the channel and always appreciate you stopping by to support us. If you are new and you want more content like this in your feeds, hit that thumbs up and consider subscribing. There are so many more great games on the horizon, and we can't wait to cover them here on the channel. I also want to invite you to join the Legacy Gaming community on Discord. We just revamped our entire server, so if you're looking for a place to hang out, talk about great games, win free prizes, and group up with friends, check out the link in the description below. My name is Codiak, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching, and play on.